I feel like some of my videos have been misleading, and I want to clarify some things. Let me explain what I mean. I have gotten comments and even emails from followers saying that they've watched my videos, specifically the real life actively dying videos where I show real life actively dying and what it looks like. And they've taken those videos and then mistaken their loved ones to be actively dying, because there are everyday things that can almost mimic some of the things that happen during the actively dying phase. Let me give you an example. I always talk about changes in breathing at the end of life. During the actively dying phase, people will always breathe differently. And I'll even show an example of what that looks like. Now, someone will take that and then see their dad sleeping on the couch one night, right? And their dad starts breathing funny. And they're like, oh my God, my dad's actively dying. But really, he just has sleep apnea. So sleep apnea can oftentimes look like the changes in breathing at the end of life. And there are many other examples. So in this specific video, I am going to show you real life actively dying symptoms, and then talk about why and how we can tell the difference between like real life actively dying changes in breathing and someone with sleep apnea, or actively dying and someone has modeling, and then someone who has venous insufficiency or cardiac issues, so they have feet that almost look like modeling feet. I'll give the two examples so I can really show you guys how to know actively dying versus just a symptom of some other disease that is not deadly. So let's start with some real life examples. Let's start with the changes in breathing. During the actively dying phase, which is the last phase of life when someone is dying a natural death on hospice, very specific there, right? You will see end of life breathing. And the very last type of breath you'll see is something called agonal breathing. Now I'm going to show you a real life example of that. I'll give you a trigger warning before, and then I'm going to tell you how you're going to be able to tell the difference between agonal breathing and someone with sleep apnea. Okay, so trigger warning, here is the video. Okay, that is a great example of someone agonally breathing. That's one of the last types of breath you will see at the end of someone's life. Very, very normal, is to be expected. It's a literal reflex of the natural body, okay? Now that can look an awful lot like someone who's a mouth breather at night and who has sleep apnea. So how do you know the difference? You know the difference because someone at the end of life is going to have a ton of other things going on, right? So that person that you saw in that video was unconscious for many days, has not eaten or drank anything. And they likely have other things going on too, which I'll get into later in the video about changes in skin color, changes in skin temperature, right? This person has been on hospice, they have a terminal illness, there's other things going on. If you just see your loved one who is otherwise pretty healthy, suddenly having these changes in breathing, or they breathe like that every night, it is different. The person who is having these changes in breathing already have a lot of other things going on. They've been sick. You know they're on hospice. They haven't eaten and drank anything. They're unconscious, right? In order for someone to be actively dying and showing those symptoms, they have to have other things going on besides just the changes in breathing. So I'm not saying your loved one with sleep apnea shouldn't get help, right? There are things to do for sleep apnea, but I want to make sure there's a distinction there. Actively dying symptoms are very, very specific. They're not just going to happen with just anybody. They are only going to be happening when someone's dying, right? And usually they happen when someone is dying a natural death, which means they're dying from something, but they're in this slow progression of being on hospice, everybody knowing they're getting close to death, right? They usually don't just suddenly start happening. So you have to remember that all of these things are for a very specific case. And that case is usually someone on hospice who has been dying a natural death. Another example, modeling. Modeling is something that can happen during the actively dying phase. And what it looks like is someone usually presenting with purplish, grayish looking feet, hands. Sometimes the top of their knees will change color, right? So it's a sign that nurses look for towards the end of life that will tell you, hey, someone might be getting close to death because they are showing signs like mottling. I'll show you a picture right here. This is a great example of what mottling will look like. However, I've had so many people write into me saying, oh my gosh, I went to go visit my mom. I looked at her feet. Her feet were super purple. I think she has mottling. I think she's getting close to death. Or they send me pictures of like the current president's hands and ankles and how they look swollen and they look red and they look kind of purple. And does this mean he's end of life? No, and let me explain. Again, mottling is for a very specific part of end of life. And when someone has true mottling, they are already unconscious, not eating and drinking for days, probably have changes in breathing, and then also mottling. So they have all of these other very big symptoms that show us as healthcare providers that they are at the end of life. Plus, this population of people who have mottling are usually already on hospice and have already shown signs of decline along the way to prove to us that this is true mottling. Because what mottling can look like is something very common that happens in almost everybody when they start getting older, which is like venous insufficiency, some cardiac issues, right? There's still issues going on, perfusion issues, which causes them to have circulation issues, which makes them have, purple feet, specifically when they're like sitting down for long periods of time, or discolored hands, right? All of those things are signs of issues, right? Usually cardiac issues, but that doesn't mean that they're actively dying. Do you see the difference? And again, I'm not saying that doesn't mean there's not problems there. There's still problems, right? But that doesn't put them in the actively dying category. And last but not least, the death rattle, or AKA terminal secretions. And I am going to show real life video of terminal secretions so you can hear what it sounds like. Terminal secretions is a very specific thing, and it happens at the very, very end of life, hence the nickname death rattle. Because when you hear it, it usually means someone's dying. However, it can also sound just a lot like someone snoring, or someone, if they're really congested, or someone who has swallowing issues can sometimes have a little gurgly tint to like their voice or when they speak. Two very different things. So trigger warning, let me have you listen to a real life death rattle. Trigger warning, here are the videos. Okay, so that is how the death rattle can sound. And the biggest distinction here is that there are other things going on besides just the death rattle, right? These people have been on hospice. We know that they are getting close to death. They've already been unconscious and not eating and drinking for days. They've had changes in breathing, and now they have the death rattle. And if you're more curious about the death rattle and why it happens and what it is, I have other videos on my page about that, so go check those out. So what happens is people watch my videos, which is amazing, thank you, but then they'll hear their loved one at night maybe snoring a little more. Even if your loved one is on hospice and they're snoring a little more or they sound a little more gurgly, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the death rattle. The death rattle is very specific. It's at the very, very, very end of life, and your loved one is going to be fully unconscious and have all the other things going on, like changes in breathing. They haven't eaten and drank anything, right? If your loved one is just suddenly snoring a lot more or having a lot of secretions when they talk, that doesn't equate to the death rattle. That might equate to something else being wrong, like they're having swallowing issues or they need to be sat up a little bit when they sleep. So there could be other things going on, but that's not the death rattle. The death rattle is something very specific and really only happens a couple days to only a few hours before death. There is a big difference. I think the big take home here is that when someone is actively dying and showing those symptoms, there's a big picture you're looking at. They have a terminal illness. They haven't been conscious. They're not eating and drinking. Those big things will help you know that the symptoms you're seeing are more of the actively dying symptoms versus just like regular things that can happen to anyone who has cardiac issues or sleep apnea, perfusion issues. It's a different picture. You're not seeing all of the things like not eating and drinking, being on hospice, being unconscious for days, right? And the big take home is you have a provider saying to you, your loved one's in the actively dying phase. If your loved one hasn't been in that phase yet, they're most likely not in that phase because you heard them snoring at night or seeing them with sleep apnea symptoms. Again, this is all for you guys to obviously always take to your doctors, to your physicians, but I wanted to make sure I was clear about the information I was putting out there. So I hope that helps. Love ya.